The first thing I noticed was the smell, an acrid, nauseating stench that clawed its way into my lungs and made my stomach churn. I tried to move, but my body felt like it was encased in concrete, every muscle refusing to respond. Panic surged through me as I struggled to make sense of my surroundings. Where was I? What had happened? My mind was a foggy maze, offering no answers, only fragments of memories that slipped away as soon as I reached for them. I forced my eyes open, blinking against the harsh light that filtered through the haze. It took a moment for my vision to adjust, and when it did, a cold wave of dread washed over me. I was surrounded by mountains of trash, broken bottles, rotting food, twisted metal, and endless heaps of things people had discarded without a second thought. I was lying on a mound of garbage, like some kind of grotesque offering to the vultures circling above. My breath hitched as I tried to sit up, a sharp pain shooting through my head. I reached up, my fingers grazing a tender spot just above my temple. Blood, sticky and warm, clung to my fingertips. The sight of it sent my heart racing, but I pushed the fear down, forcing myself to focus. I needed to get out of here. I needed to understand what was happening. As I struggled to my feet, my legs wobbled beneath me, and I had to steady myself against a rusted metal pipe jutting out of the debris. Every movement was agony, but I couldn't afford to stop. I scanned my surroundings, desperately searching for something. Anything that could explain how I had ended up here. My memory was a fractured mess, but slowly, painfully, it began to piece itself together. My father's funeral. The weight of grief pressing down on me like a vice. Michael's cold, distant gaze as he offered his hollow condolences. I remembered the argument we had later, his voice sharp with irritation as he dismissed my concerns. And then, darkness. A void where my memories should have been. A sudden noise cut through the fog of my thoughts. A low, distant rumble. My breath caught in my throat as I realized it was the sound of a car engine, growing louder with each passing second. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. The last thing I wanted was to be found in this wretched place. But something told me that whoever was approaching was the very reason I was here. I dropped to the ground, crawling behind a stack of old tires, my body screaming in protest with every movement. The engine roared closer, and then, with a screech of brakes, the vehicle came to a halt. I risked a glance around the edge of the tires and saw it. A sleek black SUV, its polished surface a stark contrast to the filth around it. The door swung open, and two figures stepped out. My breath caught in my throat as I recognized them. Michael, tall and imposing in his tailored suit, his eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses that did nothing to conceal the coldness beneath. And beside him, Emily, her sleek brunette hair pulled back into a tight ponytail, her every movement precise and calculated. My heart lurched in my chest as I watched them, a sickening realization dawning on me. They were here for me. I'm telling you, Michael, you should have finished the job yourself, Emily said, her voice a smooth, venomous purr. Leaving it to those idiots was a mistake. Michael sighed, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. It's done, Emily. No one's going to find her out here. By the time they do, it'll be too late. My blood ran cold as their words sank in. They thought I was dead. They had left me here to rot, discarded like garbage. But why? What had driven the man I loved, the man I had trusted with my life, to do something so monstrous? What about the inheritance? Emily's voice cut through my thoughts, sharp and impatient. Are you sure it's all going to you? Michael laughed, a cruel, hollow sound that sent a shiver down my spine. Of course it is. Everything's in order. Once she's declared dead, all of it, her father's estate, the money, it's all mine. I felt a surge of nausea, bile rising in my throat. My father's legacy, the fortune he had built through years of hard work and sacrifice, was the reason for this. Michael had married me for my money, and now, with my father gone, he had decided to expedite his claim on it by getting rid of me. The betrayal was so deep, so complete, that it nearly shattered me. But as I crouched there, hidden in the shadows of the dump, something inside me hardened. They thought they had won. They thought I was finished. But I wasn't dead, not yet. And as long as I was breathing, I would make sure they paid for what they had done. I watched as they finished their conversation, their words blending into a blur of cruel laughter and cold reassurances. When they finally left, the SUV's engine roaring back to life as it sped away, I allowed myself a single shaky breath. They were gone, but I wasn't alone. I had myself, my wits, and the one thing they never counted on, my will to survive. I would crawl out of this pit of despair. I would find a way back to the world, and when I did, I would bring them both down. For my father, for everything they had taken from me. I would make them suffer. The night had fallen completely by the time I managed to drag myself to my feet, every step a battle against the pain and exhaustion threatening to overwhelm me. But I wouldn't let it. I couldn't let it. My mind was already working, already planning. Every thought focused on one goal, revenge. As I stumbled through the dark, guided only by the faint glimmer of distant city lights, I swore to myself that I would survive this. I would rise from the shadows they had tried to bury me in. And when I did, Michael and Emily would rue the day they ever crossed me. This wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. The moon hung low in the sky, a sliver of silver casting faint light on the desolate landscape around me. The chill of the night air seeped into my bones as I staggered through the maze of discarded junk, my legs barely supporting my weight. Each step felt like I was wading through quicksand, my muscles burning with exhaustion, but I knew I couldn't stop. Not here. Not in this graveyard of forgotten things. The stench of decay clung to me, the foul odor mixing with the metallic tang of blood still trickling from the wound on my head. My mind was a whirlpool of fear, anger, and desperation. I had to keep moving, but I didn't know where to go. I had no phone, no money, nothing but the clothes on my back, which were now filthy and torn. I was lost in a sea of garbage, both literally and figuratively. Just as I felt my strength waning, the sound of a crackling fire reached my ears, carried by the night breeze. I froze, my heart pounding. Fire meant people, and people meant danger or salvation. I couldn't afford to be reckless, not after what had just happened, but I was too weak to keep going. The fire could be my only chance. I moved cautiously, following the faint glow of the flames as I weaved through the twisted metal and piles of broken glass. As I got closer, I could hear voices, 2 of them. They were low, murmuring in the darkness, but the tone was gentle, almost comforting. I crept forward until I could see the source of the light. The fire was small, flickering at the base of a crude metal barrel, the flames casting dancing shadows on the figures huddled around it. An elderly woman, her face lined with deep wrinkles, sat on a makeshift stool, stirring something in a dented pot. Beside her, a stocky man with a thick gray beard poked at the fire with a rusted piece of metal. They were dressed in layers of worn, patched clothing, their hands rough and calloused from years of hard living. I hesitated, torn between the need for help and the fear of what these strangers might do if they found me. But as I watched them, something about their presence soothed the raw edges of my nerves. They didn't seem dangerous, just tired, like life had beaten them down, but they had refused to be broken. I was about to step back, to retreat into the shadows and find another way, when my foot caught on a piece of debris. The noise echoed in the stillness, and before I could react, the woman's head snapped up, her eyes locking onto mine. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice sharp with caution. My breath hitched as I tried to shrink back into the darkness, but it was too late. The man was on his feet in an instant, moving with surprising speed for someone his age. He grabbed a piece of wood from the ground, brandishing it like a weapon as he advanced toward me. "Come out," he growled, his voice low and dangerous. "We don't want any trouble, but we won't let you hurt us, either." I knew I had no choice. If I tried to run, I wouldn't get far in my condition. Taking a deep breath, I stepped into the light, holding up my hands in a gesture of surrender. "Please," I crowed, my voice barely more than a whisper. "I'm not here to hurt you. I need help." The man stopped in his tracks, his eyes narrowing as he took in my disheveled appearance. For a moment, we stood there in silence, the fire crackling between us. Then, slowly, the tension in his posture eased, and he lowered the piece of wood. "Walter, look at her. the woman said, her voice softening with concern. She's hurt. Walter, if that was his name, nodded, his expression shifting from suspicion to worry. He took a step closer, his gaze flicking to the blood on my forehead. What happened to you? I opened my mouth to speak, but the words caught in my throat. How could I explain the nightmare I had just escaped? How could I make them understand the depth of my fear and betrayal? Instead, all I could manage was a single, trembling word: please. The woman set down her pot and hurried over, her hands gentle as she guided me to a spot near the fire. You're safe now, she murmured, her touch like a balm to my frayed nerves. You're safe with us. The warmth of the fire seeped into my frozen limbs as I sank to the ground, my body sagging with exhaustion. The woman, Helen, as Walter called her, quickly set to work. Cleaning the wound on my head with a piece of cloth, she dipped in water from a tin can. Her hands were steady, her movements practiced, as if she had done this countless times before. What's your name, dear? Helen asked as she dabbed at the blood. Sophia, I replied, my voice shaking. Sophia Brooks. Well, Sophia, she said with a small, reassuring smile, you're lucky we found you. You shouldn't be out here all alone. It's dangerous. Dangerous. The word echoed in my mind, a bitter reminder of the danger I had narrowly escaped. But as I looked at these two strangers, I realized that, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I didn't feel threatened. Their presence, their care, was like a lifeline in the dark abyss I had been plunged into. Walter returned to the fire, adding more wood to the flames as he watched us with a wary eye. What were you doing out here, Sophia? He asked, his tone cautious but not unkind. I hesitated, the truth tangled in my throat. How could I explain that my own husband had tried to kill me? That the life I had known was a lie, built on deceit and greed. But there was something in their eyes, something that told me they would understand, that they had their own scars, their own stories of survival. I was left here, I finally said, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. My husband, he. My voice broke, and I couldn't continue. Helen's eyes widened in shock, and Walter let out a low curse. That bastard, he muttered, shaking his head. What kind of man does that to his own wife? The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken pain. But there was no answer, no way to explain the depths of Michael's betrayal. All I could do was sit there, feeling the weight of their sympathy pressing down on me like a comforting blanket. Don't worry, Sophia, Helen said softly, her hand resting gently on my arm. You're safe now. We'll take care of you. I looked into her eyes, searching for any sign of deception, but all I saw was kindness, genuine and untainted. It was so foreign to me, so unexpected, that it brought tears to my eyes. I had been prepared to fight, to struggle to survive, but here were these two strangers, offering me something I hadn't dared hope for: compassion. As the fire crackled and the night deepened, I found myself telling them everything. The words tumbled out in a rush, my voice trembling as I recounted the horror of waking up in that dump, the cold realization of Michael's betrayal, and the desperation that had driven me to seek shelter in the darkness. They listened without interruption, their faces etched with understanding and quiet anger on my behalf. When I finally finished, the weight of exhaustion pressing down on me, Helen squeezed my hand. You're stronger than you know, Sophia, and you're not alone in this. We're here for you. Walter nodded in agreement, his gaze steady. We've seen a lot out here, but what you've been through, it's unforgivable. We'll help you, whatever you need. Their words wrapped around me like a shield, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a glimmer of hope. I wasn't alone. I had allies, strangers, yes, but kind and willing to stand by me. And with their help, I would find a way to reclaim my life. As the fire burned low and the night grew colder, Helen and Walter made up a small bed for me near the fire, offering me what little comfort they could. I lay down, pulling the threadbare blanket they gave me tightly around my shoulders. The stars above twinkled faintly through the haze of the city, and as I closed my eyes, I let their presence lull me into a restless sleep. But even as I drifted into unconsciousness, one thought remained clear in my mind. Michael thought he had won, but he was wrong. I was still alive, And with the help of these two strangers, I would rise from the ashes of the life he had tried to destroy. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. I woke to the soft, crackling fire and the distant chirping of crickets in the night. My body was stiff, the aches of the previous day still clinging to me, but I felt different this morning. A kind of calm, a strange stillness that came with knowing there was no rush, no immediate threat looming over me. But that didn't mean the darkness of my past had loosened its grip. The faces of Helen and Walter, the elderly couple who had taken me in, faded into the background as I stared into the flames. The flicker of the fire reminded me of my wedding day, the golden light spilling over Michael's face, his smile so bright and genuine that I thought I had married the man of my dreams. The man I loved. Now that memory felt like a cruel joke. I closed my eyes, letting the memories come. I hadn't had time to process what had happened. Michael, the love of my life, or so I thought, had left me for dead in a dump, discarded like a useless object. It didn't make sense. It was like trying to fit the pieces of a puzzle together that didn't belong to the same picture. Michael. He was tall, charismatic, and confident. I had been drawn to him the moment we met. That night on the bus, was it really 5 years ago? I had been so tired, slumped in the seat, mindlessly watching the rain streak down the window, when he sat down next to me, drenched but smiling as if the downpour didn't bother him at all. His suit clung to him, perfectly tailored even in the rain, and his piercing blue eyes locked onto mine as if he had known me all his life. "You look like someone who's had a long day," he had said, his voice rich and smooth, like a secret shared between only us. I had smiled despite myself. You could say that. For the next few stops, we talked. Just small talk. Nothing significant, but something about him felt magnetic, like he could see past the tired exterior and into the real me. When I got off the bus, I had given him my number. I hadn't expected anything to come of it, but by the next morning, he had texted me, asking if I wanted to grab coffee. That coffee date turned into dinner, then long walks in the park, and before I knew it, I was head over heels in love with him. Michael was everything I had ever wanted, attentive, charming, and ambitious. He swept me off my feet with grand gestures, like surprising me with weekend getaways or showing up at my office with flowers for no reason at all. He had a way of making me feel like the most important person in the world, like I was the center of his universe. But now, looking back, I could see the cracks that had always been there. I just hadn't wanted to see them. As the fire crackled beside me, my mind drifted to our wedding day. It had been a perfect summer evening, the air warm and sweet with the scent of flowers. The ceremony was a grand affair, everything Michael had promised it would be. My father, always the picture of pride and joy, walked me down the aisle, his eyes misty with emotion. Michael stood at the altar, waiting for me, his eyes gleaming with something that I now realized wasn't love, it was greed. I remembered the way his hands trembled slightly as we exchanged vows, the way his gaze flicked to the guests as if he was scanning the crowd, always calculating. At the time, I had thought it was nerves, but now I knew better. He wasn't nervous about committing to me. He was already plotting his next move. Even then, as I said, "I do," Michael was thinking about how to make my inheritance his own. That should have been the first clue, but love makes you blind. He made me believe that he was the perfect husband. We traveled, we laughed, we made love like our lives were a fairy tale. But underneath the surface, there were signs that I ignored. The first time I saw him gamble, it had been innocent enough. We were at a friend's charity event, and Michael had joined in on a poker game, laughing and charming everyone at the table. I hadn't thought much of it. After all, it was for charity. The morning light filtered through the small, cracked window of Helen and Walter's home, casting a soft glow over the worn furniture and the mismatched assortment of belongings that filled the room. I sat at the small wooden table, my hands wrapped around a chipped mug of herbal tea that Helen had brewed for me. The warmth of the tea seeped into my fingers, but it did little to thaw the icy resolve that had taken root in my heart. I had spent the night tossing and turning, haunted by the memories of Michael's betrayal and the cold, calculating way he had discussed my death with Emily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces, heard their voices, felt the searing pain of their betrayal all over again. But somewhere in the midst of that pain, something else had taken shape, a burning desire for justice. Michael and Emily had underestimated me. They had left me for dead, confident that I would never return to disrupt their plans. But they were wrong. I was alive, and I was determined to make them pay for what they had done. I wouldn't be content with merely surviving. I wanted them to face the consequences of their actions. I wanted them to feel the same fear and helplessness that they had inflicted upon me. As I stared into the swirling depths of my tea, a plan began to form in my mind. It wasn't enough to expose them. I needed to do it in a way that would ensure they couldn't weasel their way out of it. Michael was cunning, and I knew he would have covered his tracks well. But everyone made mistakes, and I was counting on finding one. The first step was to gather evidence, and for that I needed help. My thoughts turned to James, the young doctor Helen had mentioned. She had spoken of him with such warmth and trust that I felt a glimmer of hope. If he was as kind and resourceful as she had described, he might be exactly what I needed. Later that morning, Helen introduced me to James. He arrived at their home with a small medical bag slung over his shoulder and a calm, reassuring presence that instantly put me at ease. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that curled slightly at the ends and eyes that held a quiet intelligence. There was something about the way he moved, unhurried, yet purposeful, that made me feel like I could trust him. "Sophia," he said, extending a hand as Helen made the introductions. "I've heard a bit about what happened to you. I'm here to help in any way I can." His words were simple, but they carried a weight that I found comforting. I took his hand, feeling the steady strength in his grip. "Thank you, James. I don't know where to start." James pulled up a chair and sat across from me, his expression serious but kind. "Why don't you tell me everything? Start from the beginning. We'll figure this out together." And so I did. I told him everything, how Michael and I had met, how our relationship had slowly unraveled after my father's death, and how I had discovered his affair with Emily. I recounted the horrors of waking up in that dump, the terror of realizing that Michael had planned my death, and the cold, hard resolve that had driven me to seek justice. James listened without interruption, his eyes never leaving mine as I spoke. When I finished, he nodded slowly, as if absorbing the full impact of what I had told him. "This is serious, Sophia, but we can't rush into anything. We need to be smart about this." I nodded, grateful for his level-headedness. "I know. I need to find proof, something that ties Michael and Emily to their plan. Financial records, communications, anything that shows they were plotting against me." James leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping thoughtfully on the table. "Do you have access to any of Michael's documents? Bank statements, emails, anything like that?" I hesitated, thinking back to the life I had left behind. Michael was always careful. He kept most of his important documents in a locked drawer in his study. I never had the key, but I know where he hides his spare. James smiled slightly, a spark of determination lighting up his eyes. "Good. We can use that. But getting to those documents won't be easy. We'll need to plan this carefully." Over the next few days, James and I worked tirelessly to put our plan into motion. He called in a favor from a friend in the police department, a detective named Clara who specialized in financial crimes. Clara agreed to help us on the condition that we could provide her with solid evidence. She was sharp, relentless, and exactly the kind of ally we needed. With Clara's guidance, we devised a strategy to access Michael's study without raising suspicion. I would return to the house under the guise of needing to collect some personal belongings, an excuse that wouldn't arouse too much suspicion given the circumstances. Once inside, I would use the spare key to access the locked drawer in Michael's study and retrieve any documents that could incriminate him. The day of the operation, my nerves were on edge. I hadn't been back to the house since Michael had left me for dead, and the thought of facing him again filled me with both fear and anger. But I knew I had to do this. If I backed down now, he would win, and that was something I couldn't allow. James insisted on accompanying me, posing as a friend who was helping me move some things. His presence was a comfort, a reminder that I wasn't alone in this fight. We arrived at the house in the early afternoon, the sun casting long shadows across the driveway. My heart raced as I walked up the familiar path to the front door, the weight of the past pressing down on me with every step. To my surprise, it was Emily who answered the door. She looked startled to see me, her eyes widening in shock before she quickly composed herself. "Sophia," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "I wasn't expecting you." I forced a tight smile, my hands trembling slightly as I gripped the strap of my bag. "I need to collect some things," I said, my voice steady despite the tension coiling in my chest. "I won't be long." Emily hesitated, glancing over her shoulder as if checking for Michael, but then she stepped aside, allowing us to enter. The house was exactly as I remembered it, tastefully decorated, meticulously clean, and utterly devoid of warmth. As I walked through the familiar rooms, memories assaulted me from all sides. The dinner parties, the quiet evenings by the fire, the laughter that now felt like a cruel joke. This place had once been my sanctuary, but now it felt like a mausoleum, filled with the ghosts of a life that no longer existed. James and I moved quickly, gathering a few items from the bedroom to maintain the pretense, before making our way to Michael's study. My heart pounded as I reached behind a painting on the wall, my fingers finding the small hidden compartment where Michael kept his spare key. I retrieved it with trembling hands, casting a quick glance at James, who nodded in silent encouragement. With a deep breath, I unlocked the drawer and began sifting through its contents. Bank statements, investment records, correspondence. Everything was there, meticulously organized. I pulled out the most incriminating documents, my hands shaking as I scanned through them. Payments to offshore accounts, suspicious transfers, emails discussing my father's estate. It was all there, a web of deceit that tied Michael and Emily to their sinister plan. Just as I stuffed the last of the documents into my bag, I heard footsteps approaching the study. My heart leaped into my throat as the door swung open, and Michael stood there, his eyes narrowing as he took in the scene. "What the hell are you doing?" he demanded, his voice cold and laced with suspicion. For a moment, fear paralyzed me, but then I remembered why I was here. I straightened, meeting his gaze with a steely determination. "I'm taking back what's mine," I said, my voice firm. "You won't get away with this, Michael." His eyes darkened, and for a split second, I saw the true Michael, the ruthless, calculating man who had plotted my death without a second thought. But before he could react, James stepped forward, his posture calm but commanding. "It's over, Michael," James said, his voice steady. "We have everything we need. The police will be here soon." Michael's face twisted with rage, but he didn't move. He knew he was cornered, trapped by the very lies he had spun. For a moment, I thought he might lash out, but then he simply turned on his heel and stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. I let out a shaky breath, the adrenaline finally catching up with me. James placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder, his touch grounding me in the moment. "You did it, Sophia," he said softly. "It's over." But as I looked around the room, the weight of everything that had happened, everything I had lost, pressed down on me like a heavy shroud. It wasn't over. Not yet. There was still a long road ahead, filled with questions and doubts. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a glimmer of hope. The police arrived shortly after, led by Clara, who wasted no time in arresting Michael and Emily. As they were led away in handcuffs, their faces a mixture of shock and fury, I felt a sense of vindication. Justice had been served, but the victory was bittersweet. My life would never be the same, but at least now I had the chance to rebuild it. As James and I left the house that day, I knew one thing for certain. I was no longer the woman who had once been helpless and afraid. I had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, ready to reclaim my life on my own terms. And with James by my side, I was finally ready to start anew. The echoes of the past still lingered in the corners of my mind, but the shadows had begun to recede, replaced by a light that was slowly but surely growing brighter. It had been weeks since Michael and Emily were arrested, and though the legal proceedings were far from over, I could feel the weight of their betrayal lifting from my shoulders. The life I had once known was gone, But in its place, something new was beginning to take shape, something fragile, yet full of promise. James had been by my side through it all, his quiet strength and unwavering support helping me navigate the chaos that followed Michael's downfall. The media had caught wind of the story, of course, and Harris left for dead by her husband in a plot to steal her inheritance was too juicy a tale to ignore. But James shielded me from the worst of it, standing as a buffer between me and the relentless hounds of the press. He became my confidant, my anchor, and though I was hesitant to admit it at first, the one person who made me believe in the possibility of love again. It was a crisp autumn evening when James asked me to meet him at a small cafe on the outskirts of the city, a place far removed from the prying eyes and incessant questions that had become part of my daily life. The air was cool, tinged with the scent of fallen leaves and the promise of winter, and as I walked through the quiet streets, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed. When I arrived at the cafe, James was already there, waiting for me at a secluded table near the back. He looked up as I entered, a smile spreading across his face that sent warmth flooding through me. I hadn't realized how much I needed that smile, how much I had come to depend on his presence in my life. "Sophia," he said, standing to greet me. "I'm glad you came." "Of course," I replied, returning his smile as I took the seat opposite him. I needed to get away from everything for a while. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. I thought this place might be a good spot for a quiet conversation. It's one of my favorites, off the beaten path, peaceful. Just what we both need. The cafe was small and cozy, with mismatched furniture and a comforting smell of freshly brewed coffee and pastries. The low hum of conversation filled the air, punctuated by the clinking of cups and the occasional burst of laughter. It was the kind of place where people came to escape, to find solace in the simple pleasures of life. We ordered our drinks, black coffee for James, a spiced chai for me, and sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, letting the tranquility of the cafe seep into our bones. But there was something in the air, a tension just beneath the surface, as if we both knew this conversation would be different from the ones we'd had before. "Sophia," James began, his voice soft but steady. "There's something I've been wanting to talk to you about." I looked up, meeting his gaze. There was a seriousness in his eyes, a depth of emotion that took my breath away. "What is it, James?" He hesitated, as if searching for the right words, then took a deep breath and plunged ahead. "These past few weeks, I've watched you go through something no one should ever have to endure. And through it all, you've shown more strength and resilience than I could have ever imagined. You've rebuilt your life from the ashes, and I've been honored to be a part of that journey." My heart began to race, a mixture of anticipation and anxiety tightening in my chest. "James." He held up a hand, stopping me gently. "Let me finish, please. I need to say this." He reached across the table, taking my hand in his. His touch was warm, grounding, and I found myself gripping his hand a little tighter. "I've come to care for you, Sophia, more than I ever thought possible. At first, I just wanted to help, to be there for you as a friend. But somewhere along the way, I realized it was more than that. I realized that I don't just want to help you rebuild your life. I want to be a part of it." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt a rush of emotions so intense that it nearly overwhelmed me. Could it really be true? After everything that had happened, could I really find happiness again? Could I let myself believe in love once more? James squeezed my hand, his gaze never leaving mine. "Sophia, I love you. I've fallen in love with the incredible woman you are, with your strength, your kindness, your determination. I want to spend my life with you, if you'll have me." Time seemed to stop as his words sank in, each one landing with the weight of a promise. For a moment, I couldn't speak, couldn't move, as the realization of what he was offering washed over me. This was real. This was love, not the kind that used and manipulated, but the kind that nurtured and healed. "James," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I don't know what to say." He smiled, a hint of nervousness in his eyes. "You don't have to say anything right now. I know this is a lot, and I don't want to rush you. But I needed you to know how I feel. I needed you to know that you're not alone. Tears welled up in my eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of gratitude, of hope. I had been through so much, endured so much pain, but here was James, offering me a future filled with love and possibility. Could I dare to take that leap? Could I let myself be happy again? In that moment, I realized that I wanted to try. I wanted to leave the past behind, to close the door on the darkness that had once consumed me, and step into the light that James was offering. It wouldn't be easy. There were still wounds that needed to heal, still fears that lingered in the corners of my mind. But with James by my side, I believed I could face whatever challenges lay ahead. "I love you too, James," I finally said, my voice barely more than a whisper. I didn't think it was possible, not after everything that's happened. But you've shown me that it is. You've given me hope again. His smile widened, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. "Does that mean?" I nodded, a tear slipping down my cheek as I smiled back at him. "Yes, James. Yes, I'll marry you." The words were barely out of my mouth before he was out of his chair, pulling me into his arms. I buried my face in his chest, breathing in the scent of him, feeling the steady beat of his heart against mine. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly safe, truly loved. As we held each other, the noise of the cafe faded into the background, leaving only the sound of our breathing, the warmth of our embrace. This was my new beginning, a chance to build a life on a foundation of love and trust, not lies and betrayal. And with James by my side, I knew that anything was possible. We spent the rest of the evening talking about the future, about dreams and plans that had once seemed so far out of reach. We talked about the kind of life we wanted to build together, about the things we would leave behind, and the things we would carry forward. And as the night wore on, I found myself filled with a sense of anticipation, of excitement for what was to come. The shadows of my past would always be there, but they no longer held the power they once did. They were a part of my story, but they didn't define me. What defined me now was the love I had found in the most unexpected of places, and the strength I had discovered within myself. As James and I walked out of the cafe, hand in hand, I looked up at the sky, at the stars twinkling above us like tiny beacons of hope. The night was cool, but I didn't feel the chill. I felt only the warmth of James's hand in mine, the promise of a future filled with love and happiness. This was my new beginning, and I was ready to embrace it with everything I had. I had survived the darkness, and now it was time to step into the light. With James by my side, I knew that anything was possible, and that the best was yet to come.